Welcome back to Criminally Human, where behind every headline lies a person, a story, and a tragedy that didn't have to happen. On a humid July morning in 2022, deputies in Spring, Texas, were dispatched to a quiet suburban street for a missing child report. 7-year-old Troy Koehler had seemingly vanished overnight. His adoptive mother, 38-year-old Tiffany Thomas, told officers she had just returned from driving for Lyft and found him gone. She and her husband, 45-year-old Jemaine Thomas, claimed they had searched the neighborhood and called out his name, but there was no sign of him. Police immediately began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, scouring yards, and calling in K-9 units. The community braced itself for the worst, a possible abduction. But as investigators reviewed home security cameras, the story began to unravel. Footage showed no sign of Troy leaving the house, no one entering overnight, no open doors or windows. It was as if the boy had simply vanished into thin air. That realization shifted the search inward, back into the Thomas home itself. After nearly an hour, deputies stepped into the garage and opened the lid of a top-loading washing machine. What they found was horrifying. Inside, fully clothed and twisted unnaturally, lay the lifeless body of 7-year-old Troy Koehler. His pajama pants were pulled down to his knees. His skin was damp, and bruises marked his small frame. A bump on his forehead hinted at blunt force trauma, and the faint smell of blood and urine lingered inside the machine. In that instant, this was no longer a search for a missing child. It was a homicide investigation. To understand how Troy ended up here, you have to understand where he came from. Troy's story began in hardship long before the Thomas household. He was born into instability, his biological family plagued by neglect and unsafe living conditions. The details of those early years remain sealed in family court records, but what's clear is that by the time Troy was a toddler, Child Protective Services had intervened. He entered the foster care system, a system meant to save children, yet one already stretched far too thin. Troy moved between multiple foster placements during those formative years, never knowing permanence, until 2019, when Tiffany and Jemaine Thomas adopted him. On paper, this looked like the happy ending every foster child hopes for. A forever family, a stable home, and a fresh start. But adoption doesn't erase trauma, and it doesn't guarantee love. Behind closed doors, Troy's new life was far from the safe haven it appeared to be. The Thomases' own backgrounds foreshadowed the darkness to come. Jemaine Thomas was described by neighbors and former acquaintances as volatile and controlling. Public records paint a picture of financial instability, job changes, mounting stress, and prior domestic tensions that, while never resulting in charges, hinted at an undercurrent of anger simmering beneath the surface. Tiffany Thomas, though quieter in demeanor, carried her own resentment. Friends later revealed that she frequently vented about Troy, complaining that he was difficult or disruptive. Rather than seeing him as a child working through the scars of early neglect, Tiffany reportedly framed him as a problem, someone to be managed, not cherished. The couple's dynamic created a household defined not by nurturing, but by frustration and simmering hostility. By early 2022, those tensions were becoming impossible to hide. Teachers at Troy's school noticed troubling signs: bruises on his face, darkened eyes, a withdrawn demeanor that didn't match his normally gentle personality. When staff asked what had happened, Troy's explanations were inconsistent, sometimes vague, sometimes fearful. 2 separate reports were filed with CPS that year alone. Investigators visited the Thomas home, but the allegations never resulted in his removal. Whether due to lack of clear evidence or simply the crushing caseloads Texas CPS faced, some workers handling more than double the recommended number of children, Troy remained where he was. And those missed chances to intervene would prove fatal. The key to unraveling the truth about Troy's final days came from the couple's own words, text messages exchanged in the weeks leading up to his death. These messages revealed a disturbing escalation of anger over seemingly trivial incidents, most infamously snacks. Tiffany raged that Troy had eaten her oatmeal cream pies, threatening to put him in the stove and turn it on. Days later, Jemaine lashed out over his donut sticks, texting Tiffany, "I need to get the locks. I'm going to end up killing him." The texts grew darker over time, with references to hanging the boy from a tree and locking up food to prevent him from touching anything that wasn't his. Prosecutors later argued these weren't idle threats or venting in the heat of the moment. They were windows into a household teetering on the edge of lethal violence. These digital conversations became crucial evidence at trial, proving premeditation and exposing just how normalized cruelty had become in the Thomas home. On the night of July 27, 2022, the Thomases returned home late. Their accounts of that night shifted in interviews, first claiming Troy was asleep, later suggesting he was awake and defiant. What's certain is that by the next morning, Troy was dead. The autopsy findings were harrowing. Troy had suffered asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, and possible drowning. His injuries told a story of long-term abuse, some wounds fresh, others already healing. Blood was found inside the washing machine. Prosecutors argued that Troy had been forced into the washer as punishment, possibly while still alive. The legal aftermath stretched on for nearly 3 years. In February 2025, Jemaine Thomas pled guilty to capital murder, avoiding a possible death sentence but ensuring decades behind bars. He was sentenced that July to 50 years in prison. Tiffany Thomas pled guilty to injury to a child and awaits sentencing, scheduled for September 2025. During Jemaine's sentencing hearing, Troy's first-grade teacher, Cheryl Reed, stood in the courtroom and addressed him directly. Through tears, she described a boy who loved reading, who comforted classmates when they were sad, and who radiated kindness despite everything he endured. His future, his dreams, his life, she said, were stolen by someone who was supposed to love, protect, and nurture him. Troy's murder is more than the story of 2 abusive parents. It's a window into a broken system. Texas foster and adoption services were already under fire for chronic understaffing and high turnover. Thousands of children like Troy slip through the cracks each year, their abuse unnoticed or unaddressed until it's too late. In this case, 2 separate CPS investigations raised alarms, yet Troy remained in the very home that would become his grave. It forces us to ask hard questions. How many other children are still suffering in silence? How many warnings must be ignored before change comes? Please like and subscribe, but most of all, stay human.